All right. I wanted to switch my internet before we started, so hopefully that is going to be a little bit better. Um, we'll see. Okay. I have a good one today. I wanted to talk about this concept that came up, and I was looking through some old family videos that one of my family members got put on disc. So, see people you haven't seen in so long because they have passed away, decades and decades ago. And it got me thinking about a concept that I know I've touched on before. I'm almost positive. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'll make sure we're recording. That I've touched on it before, but I do want to explore it, and that's the concept of other people anchoring a timeline for us, and when they exit the timeline collapsing, and that is something that we've all seen. Right now, we have a component in that. I don't want to come off and say that other people are controlling when your timelines collapse, because we are part of that timeline collapse also, But it feels like when you look at it from the outside, this person died, the timeline collapsed. This person left the friend group, the whole friend group imploded. This person passed away, and all of a sudden, we used to get together every Christmas, and as soon as this person died, we don't get together every Christmas anymore. You can probably go back in your life and look at all the times when one thing pivoted and then this whole group attached to them collapsed. Right? Like everyone in your life that was attached through that person was gone, even though you might have thought you had your own associations with these people. But as soon as that anchor point, I think that's how I described it before, it's like an anchor point. Anchor being, or there's such a thing. Is there such a thing as one person that anchors that whole group? And when they're gone, the group falls apart. And like I've said, you can go back, and I will bet you will see these patterns where something happens to one person in the group, and the whole thing just pitters out, right? And there's a lot of reasons why this happens, and it's not because you get this. We have this inner monologue, right? That no one cared enough about us to stay, right? We're always going to play the inner monologue as to why it happens the way it happens. Why, all of a sudden we met every Christmas, then your mother died, and then no one wants to come home anymore. Or, kids in high school, when people go to college, and all the friend group falls apart because one person doesn't want to come back for summer anymore. They want to stay at school, and then nobody wants to get together, and that seemed to be the one person everyone gravitated toward. And then we kind of feel like we're in this but kind of left out of it, and that we're not as important in the group, and we couldn't hold the group together. We couldn't hold the timeline. These people in some way anchored the timeline for us, and we couldn't hold it on our own. And because we couldn't hold it on our own, we start to think that there's something that we had done, right? And we get that whole inner narcissist going that we weren't good enough, and we couldn't make it work. And it all fell apart when this person left. And there's a reason that we can kind of talk about it. There's a reason we can kind of discuss it as to why this happens. And we want to start to kind of segregate out different reasons, right? Because it's going to be a lot of different reasons. So one thing about ascension, we always want to look at how many can we see. Don't get fixated on one. Our human's going to want the one reason. Our human's always going to want the one answer, right? I want the one answer, and give me the one answer, and that's it. We want to understand that it's going to be a lot of different reasons. And one reason is the person exits, whether it be through death or whether it be through, just leaving, going into a different timeline themselves, is they are freeing everyone else, right? Look at it like this. It's almost like you had if you want to go into soul agreements, we can kind of hit on that because it is a little relevant here, where you had a soul agreement with all these people, right? And there was a certain point when everyone reached where it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. At a certain point, everyone reached where they're like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. We don't need to keep playing this out. We're all kind of done. And even to the people who are not done, if enough people are done within that timeline and group, it'll be enough to dissolve it. And whether you decide you're 100% done You might not be. You might go play it out with other people and not even realizing you're doing it. But with that group, you're done. It's going to start to fall apart, because the trigger that triggered that person to leave is that we've all gotten all we can get out of it. We've all cleared enough of whatever we're trying to clear here. We've all gotten what we're going to get out of it. We now need to go our separate ways. And you see this breakdown in families, blood family, all the time. Now, technically, your blood family is technically your soul family. I mean, I know I've segregated it out on this channel a lot, but they are the same in a sense. I don't want it to feel like they're not, because everyone in your life is technically soul family, right? Or they can't be there. Or they're technically your twins, or they can't be there. So I don't want anyone to think that your blood family is not. But they are a group that is a very challenging group for a lot of us. And they do come kind of in and out. But they're not the only family you have. Sometimes we'll use the term soul family to describe others beyond your immediate blood family. But your blood family is technically your soul family also. Or you couldn't be in your life. So one person leaves, dies, leaves the group for whatever reason. A lot of times you see this in families when a family member dies, and everything around that family getting together just starts to fall apart. Unless someone steps up in that role, but normally that doesn't work too well, because they don't have the same energetic signature that the other person had to hold it together, to hold it down. Whether they were toxically holding it down or from a higher vibration being able to hold it down. It doesn't so much matter why or how they were doing it. It's going to matter how they were doing it as to how the group reached the point they were done. And a lot of times, not everyone in the group is going to be done at the same time. They're just done with that group. So if you think about it, like there's an energetic signature that starts to go off. Energetically, everyone starts discussing, like, okay, we're kind of done here. And then that person knows they have to exit. Unconsciously they knew, okay, that's my time, right? So suddenly they're gone, whether it be through death or something else. Suddenly they're gone because it was their time. They had to go. They could no longer anchor it in because it was past its time, in a sense. It had served its purpose. It was time for everyone to go do other things. And they couldn't do that if everyone stayed in that, whether it be a support group. Sometimes it was more of a support group. But you have to go off on your own because you can't be dependent. Ascension is about shedding dependencies, because our human consciousness is all about being dependent on everybody. We have to be dependent on everybody. We can't not be. And even a lot of people will kind of just say, well, I'm not dependent on anybody in my human consciousness. But human consciousness cannot act on its own. It has no really thought pattern on its own. It's just running through programs. It has to be energized from external things. It has to be dependent on something, whether it be dependent on a success value from outside, a valuation from outside. It has to measure what it's doing on something. If you even think about it, it's funny because our human consciousness is the simplest computer program, but it's almost like when you see how AI can program and kind of starts to then get smarter than you think it is, right? And then it can kind of turn. That's what happens with our human consciousness, our ego consciousness. It is pretty bright. And it can trick us in a lot of ways because it can kind of shift how it manipulates us and how it gets us to do stuff. But at the end of the day, it's still just running through our programs. If once we let loose the dependencies of that external belief system, we're not stuck in that anymore, right? Because our beliefs was what keeps us stuck. Our beliefs is what keeps us in that human realities and how they are and how they're going to be and how they're going to work themselves out. That's what keeps us there, right? So when we start looking at people anchoring in a reality, now remember, we have contract with those people to come in, and we have a soul contract with all those people to come in, and we're all going to do this reality together. And whether we're completely done or enough people in the group are done where the frequencies in the group can't hold anymore, you might not be the highest frequency in that group. You might have been one of the lower frequencies at that time. We don't judge our frequency in that sense. We're just not compatible with these members anymore. And for the group to completely dissolve, that anchor being has to go. And they know they have to go. That is their agreement. They know they can't hold this together. People have to go on and do other things. Now, some people might be completely done with whatever they were trying to transition through. Other people will say they'll go do it with other people, just not you. Is it possible you'll come back together later? Sometimes. But I always find that when we do the loop, when we do the loop around, and when we come back to people that we have spent a lot of time with, especially in our human consciousness, and we kind of come back around, very, very rarely do I feel like it ever is going to live up to what it was. And you find you don't have a lot in frequency in common anymore because everyone's kind of gone and done different things. And what I tend to always go back to when we talk about, if we go back into anchoring beings, and how can someone else anchor in my reality? They're still there under your invitation. They're just kind of holding all these people together. So they're anchoring all these people together through and that's what when our human consciousness is the most upset, when the world doesn't stop and do what we want it to do. When people don't stop and do what we want them to do. I mean, in our human consciousness, 100% of our suffering comes from people not doing what we want them to do. And that can include us. Sometimes we don't do what we want us to do. But that's what makes us miserable. Because people aren't doing what we want them to do. We want to move people around on a chessboard. We want them to do what we want them to do. We want them to sit over here and wait till we get back to them. We want to move people around. That's what our human consciousness wants to do. That's what we start to break away from in Ascension. You're not doing that anymore. You're not acting like that spoiled child in a sense. If I want it right now, and if I can't get it right now, I'm just going to get really, really mad that I can't do this moment when I want to do it. And But our moments are a little different. Like for that kid, he wants it right in this moment, right now. For us, it's like I want this done maybe within 2 years, and none of it's working, none of it's getting done. None of that's happening for me because we don't read the room. We don't energetically read the room to see how does everyone else feel about this. And if I don't fit here, then is it best for me and my vibration and my frequency to go somewhere else? Do I have to try to shift everyone here? Sometimes we're supposed to try to shift people. And try to shift might not even be the word, but be a higher frequency to raise the frequency of the situation. Now, everyone might not still want to be in that. A lot of people might want to leave that. And that's okay. And that goes back into who's now anchoring that situation and how are you anchoring it. If you were in a situation like we talked about before, maybe something is getting anchored more with intimidation or guilt or any of those things, and they're that anchor being that's anchoring that reality, that part of your reality, that timeline for you, and they all of a sudden are removed from the timeline and there's nothing there to anchor it. Someone else is going to come in and try to anchor it a different way. And not everyone's going to be into that. Not everyone's going to read the room in that sense. Not everyone's going to want to hear that. Not everyone is going to care about that. And they might be trying to anchor it from a much higher vibrational place because they're capable of a different space than the other person was. But that doesn't mean everyone's going to come back together and be perfectly fine because everyone's in a different place. And vibrationally, that's probably the most challenging thing you're going to do in your ascension is being able to find people in your vibration, in your same, how do I want to say this? In your same timeline in a sense, or timeline, time span, jumping the way you're jumping, accelerating how you're accelerating. That's not easy to match up. In our human consciousness, we look for things that made us in common, right? Like, same age, same profession, same religious belief, same political belief. It didn't even matter what it was. In college, it was even easier. In high school, it's like, we go to the same high school. We, play on the same team. We root for the same team. We go to the same bar. I mean, in our human consciousness, we had a much lower bar. And even though we would say, like, well, it wouldn't seem like age or religion or any of that would be a lower bar, but in a sense it is. It's a very superficial way to pick out who you want to be around. Or maybe it's just, that person just made me laugh, so that's why, or, I just like being around that person. Now, there's, of course, a lot more going on underneath. I mean, those are the human reasons we think they're there. Soul-wise, we are energetically drawn to them because we share an energetic signature that is similar to ours. That is why we're there. But our human consciousness puts all these other things on it, right? Because having a similar energetic signature doesn't make a lot of sense when we're in our human consciousness, right? We know now that's what it was, but when we're in it, we don't, we don't break it down like that when we're in our human consciousness. We have all these other reasons. But when you start to strip all that away and you start to now really look at why are we drawn to people, and yes, it's still the same reason in a sense, it's still a frequency-driven thing, but you start to see the truth about vibrational realities. And they don't last that long because people shift in and out of timelines all day long, and people shift in and out of vibrations all the time. So being able to hold your vibration and hold it in a higher consciousness and have other people hold that consciousness with you is not the easiest thing to accomplish. And that's why a lot of our ascension journey, we do it by ourselves, because it gets really challenging to find people that we want to spend time with. We feel like it is a purpose to it, beyond just the bullshit human reasons we used to kind of give ourselves to stay in a lot of situations, because our human consciousness would always stay in situations even if we knew they didn't make a lot of sense, and even if they knew we knew they were kind of doomed. If anyone just watched The White Lotus, I'm not gonna spoil the end of it if people haven't watched it yet. There's a couple on there, and one is super into soulmates and being together forever, and no matter what this other dude does, she's like, no, we're meant to be together forever, and we're just, it's that classic twin flame, Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers kind of thing, right? And when I'm watching it, it's like every person, even on that show, or watching the show, can see a lot of the red flags, but there were still a lot of people and fans that are rooting for them to make it through, right? Rooting for that to work, even though you can look at every single flaw as to how that's not vibrationally doesn't even make any sense. It's like, even though what they're saying on a human consciousness level, there's a part of us that says, yeah, okay, I'm with her on this, let's go, we're ride or die, let's see how they do at the end, right? When they get to the end of this thing. But vibrationally, you can see they're all over the place. And it doesn't make any sense, and it's just the whole thing's gonna you probably not work. Like I said, I'm not gonna spoil the ending for people who haven't seen it. But when we're in our human consciousness, we look at things a lot differently. It doesn't mean all this other stuff isn't go on. It doesn't mean all this other stuff isn't underneath. It is underneath. We just don't have the access to understand it. We don't have the awareness to understand it. We don't have the consciousness to see that's why that took place. That's why when that person passed away, all these other things fell apart because they were anchoring that in. And it doesn't matter what frequency they were anchoring it in at that time, you matched something in that frequency, and that's why you were there. And the minute either you stop matching it, other people stop matching it, something gets switched on, that person knows, I have to exit now. It is no longer a purpose to this. On an unconscious soul level, they know that. There's not a purpose to this anymore. I have to go because this is no longer make any sense anymore. And if their vibration shifts in any way also, the whole thing will just starts to fall apart. And they don't want to be in it anymore. So I do have a strong feel that we do have these anchor beings in our realities, and yes, they're anchoring. We're allowing them to anchor there in a sense because it's our timeline. I don't want to shift it to where it's not our timeline because it's still our timeline. But when we're done with it, they will exit our timeline, and it's just we have a lot of there's a lot of people wrapped up in those timelines that go with it. And that's one thing our human doesn't so much like, and it wants to blame everyone else in the timeline for going with it, and why didn't everyone stay around, and why did the whole thing collapse? Because all these people are attached to these timelines. We have to get out of the mindset, the human mindset that everyone stays together forever and everyone goes through everything together. That is not ascended timelines. I'm not saying some people can't make it through with you, and I'm not saying that's not possible. Because I do think there are some that do kind of come through the other side. They will be greatly shifted and changed, because they will be upgraded to a different frequency. So having the same dynamic in the relationship is impossible at that point because everyone's different. You're at a different frequency. They're matching that frequency, or they couldn't stay. They're ascending to some place. You're either assisting them, they're assisting you. It's not just as simple as it felt like when we were in our human consciousness, where it was like, oh, this, and this, because we didn't see all the other stuff. We weren't aware of it. We couldn't feel the ripples, in a sense. We couldn't feel the reasons why this is not going to happen, right? Long term. We just ignored it. And I will even probably backtrack that and say, well, a lot of times we kind of knew, but we kind of stayed in it because our emotions kind of override it. Our humans are driven by emotions, right? Our emotions drive what we do. They drive how we feel. They drive the choices we make. We make all our decisions on that, but when we're in our ascended states and we're starting to ascend to a different consciousness and different higher aspects and galactic aspects, we're no longer trapped in that, in a sense. We're no longer allowing ourselves to be stuck. We can kind of see through what's going on, and we understand, and we start to understand why. I mean, this is a little off topic, but I'm gonna throw it in here. Anyone who's watched any of my stuff knows I'm big on dreams and the dream world, and anchoring in the realities in the dream world, and looking at what you're seeing in the dream world. And I've always been a big proponent of there's no big shocks that come in anyone's life. The big shockers, we know they're going to happen. Whether it be latency and we forget we dreamed it. But normally when someone's about to leave your life and they played a very important component in your life, we get a kind of sense that's going to happen. That's why we would dream about people dying, maybe years before they died. Maybe sometimes we didn't get it as long before, but we kind of knew certain things were happening. People were going to leave. A lot of times we get access for that in our dream world first. And it allows us to cut the cords. And our galactic aspects also help us with that too. So the minute you start embodying in your galactic aspects, and you might be embodying those in linear years where you have to cut the cords with a lot of people. You have to cut the cords with a lot of timelines and a lot of realities. But it gives us time to start to cut them and clear those realities and that sadness in our sleep state, and to come to terms with it in our waking state, and to get used to the idea. Before we would say, I had a bad dream, somebody passed away, and you just kind of try to forget it and put it out of your head. When you start getting into your ascended timelines, you understand that, it's showing me this is about to take place. Now, whether this person's going to leave through death or just leave, that's going to be, whatever's going on with that person. But you're going to know it's coming. And then you have maybe a couple years to work through it, depending on how far sight you can see. That does increase as you go through your ascension process. You do have longevity in how far you can see. And you can start to understand, and especially when you have someone that's really anchoring in that timeline, to kind of bring us back to how we started. Once that person's gone, a lot of that timeline is going to start to fade away. A lot of the group dynamics in that timeline will shift and change. But you have the chance to get used to the idea, and say, okay, that person's going to be gone. And you might find the first maybe 6 to 7, 8 months, when you think about it, it makes you really sad. You don't want to even think about it. You have so much it brings up so many emotions about it. And you start to clear more and more and more of that. And then maybe another year down the road, that person's going to go, but you start to notice you're not feeling that complete and utter dread and sadness about it anymore. And in our human consciousness, we would judge that and say, we just don't care. We've just come to terms with it. We've had a couple years step up in a sense. We've had more time to get used to it. We've had more time to get used to this idea. We're not so stuck on it anymore. We've had time to process it. And we're not almost blindsided. Our human consciousness would say, I didn't know it was coming. We always know it's coming. Even your human consciousness knows it's coming. It's just trying to distract you from it, shield you from it, make you forget about it. Don't remember that dream. You don't need to worry about it. Anyone who's ever had something super traumatic happen in their human experience has had some type of dream or warning about it. I will guarantee it. Okay. I will guarantee you at some point before this incident, you knew something was about to happen. And you knew something was about to happen. You knew it could have been a very symbolic dream or a very, very straightforward dream. It is just, what do you do with it? And how do you play the timeline out? How do you move the other pieces on your board around when you take that piece out and you take that person out and you see what they're holding up? Because even us, we're anchor beings in some realities where we're holding it up. And for a lot of us, that's our job. But you can look back in a lot of your human realities you created and see where other people were holding it up. And when they left, maybe no one wanted to step in and hold it up because no one cared that much about it, to be honest. That's another way you can start to look at it. And it doesn't mean they didn't care enough about it. They didn't care enough about you. They just didn't. It wasn't a priority for them to hold all that up. And you see people who even try to do it for a while. But when no one else comes in to assist and it feels like they're doing all the work, even they get tired of doing all the work. So you can look where reality, where if you exit, it seems like the whole thing starts to fall apart because you were holding it up. And there are some realities we know we're supposed to hold up for a while because that's our job. And there are others we know, you know what? I'm not supposed to do that. I've done that long enough. I'm not holding this up anymore. Now it's other people's they're gonna step up on their own, or the reality collapses. So, all right, I'll check my questions, see if I have anything. Okay. All right. I don't have anything I have to answer. If you do have questions, I can answer them now. I'm trying to think if I want to go any other direction with this. I think that's kind of a good place to kind of tie it up. I think looking at different people who were anchors in certain realities, looking at why they were anchors in that reality. Sometimes, it sounds like, I don't even want to use the word, but kind of doing a post-mortem on human realities can give us a lot of information on how realities got constructed. Because sometimes when you're in the reality, because you're not at a consciousness to pull yourself out of it yet, you can't see the workings of that one. But if you look back on a reality where you were in a different consciousness, a lower consciousness, now you're at a higher consciousness, you can now kind of dissect that. You can only do that higher conscious looking down. You know, that's when you can start to pull them apart. Sometimes it is easier to go back 20, 30 years or whatever and pull back the older ones and start to understand, oh, I see. They were the anchor there. They were holding that whole thing up, whether they realized it or not. And a lot of times consciously, they're not going to realize that. And a lot of times consciously, we're not going to realize that. When we're in a lower frequency, we can't, yes, all the signs are there. We don't have access to it. We have not unlocked that in our DNA. We have not unlocked our cellular memories yet. We haven't unlocked our ancient memories yet. We haven't done that yet. And if we haven't done that yet, then we don't have the information to pick it apart. So I invite you to go back. And like I said, it came up for me when I was looking through these. I mean, these were videos when I was an infant. So like, just to look through them and look at the certain people that were there and certain people who I know when they passed and how they passed. Now, 50 some years later, I can go back and, and at the time doesn't matter, but just in perspective of this conversation, go back and look at, that's how old some of these timelines are. You might want to go back and start to look at, because it does help you understand how they get created. And you might say, does it matter how I created a human timeline? Human timelines are driven by our human consciousness. The choices we make, then we make the timelines way more complicated. We are in a lot of stuff longer than we have to be. There's not that much difference, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, between an ascended timeline and a human timeline. We're just experiencing a timeline from a different frequency, right? We can be in a timeline for a little while with someone in a totally different frequency than us who's having an awful time. We're having an amazing time because we're in a different place, right? So our ascended timelines are beautiful and amazing because, and some of them are because we're clearing through our shit. So I also don't want to paint it like they're all great. We have to clear through a lot of our stuff to get to those moments, right? But that's the point. But our human timelines, they still have a cadence to them. They're still constructed energetically. Every timeline is constructed energetically. They're aligned with something we're giving off. They're still aligned with the frequency we have inside our body, or we can't experience them, okay? So just because it's a human timeline we created, or created from our human consciousness, technically it's still created from our soul, but we're interacting in it in our human consciousness. That's what gives it the frequency of the human consciousness, because we are making decisions and going through the maze, going through the timeline with our human consciousness driving our way. That's just making our choices for us. That's why the timeline turns out this way or turns out that way. It's not the timeline itself that's corrupted. We have corrupted it with how we built it. We have, and how, well, I don't want to even say how we built it, how we're entering into it. Why we're there, because we're not there for the right reasons. And now technically on a soul level, we're there to clear things to get to another timeline. But we're not there for pure reasons, because we don't even know what that means yet. So why we're experiencing the timeline corrupts it. Our energy as to what we want to get out of the timeline corrupts it. The purity of our soul is not there in a sense, because we haven't embodied that yet. So we're the ones that kind of tank the whole thing. But if you can go back and take that out of it, take the emotions of the timeline out of it, take the humanness out of it, you do get the cadence of the timeline. You do see the signs there, maybe 5 or 6 years before that this whole thing was about to collapse. But because we move slower, we hold on to, our human consciousness holds on to things, we don't want things to end, things tended to drag a lot more. And that's when we talk about it's hard to stay in realities with people that are not moving through things as fast, don't recognize the energetic patterns, or don't want to set up that new reality. They want to stay in the old, because they're staying in a frequency and we're not. We're trying to move forward and they're staying in the old ones. And that's why all this stuff starts to pull apart. So, okay, I'm going to end on that one. And I will see everyone next time.